Because of the following special presentation, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be seen tonight. Well, pull up a chair and set a spell here at Tales from SYL Ranch, the vlogcast that reminds you to always know where your towel is. And I'm your host, Bill Stone. And today on Tales from SYL Ranch, we have the Fandi Masters' 40th anniversary review of the Star Wars Holiday Special, but it's the abridged 45-minute watchable edition. Hi, Marshall, glad to see you back here. Now, to explain my show, for the purposes of people who, Marshall says kill me now about the Star Wars Holiday Special. Don't worry. The fan edit is really very good. It's very good. So, explaining my show for the benefit of people who may not be coming in directly on the hour like Marshall did, or for new users who may be watching this in the archives, I do live reviews. Sometimes I do serious films and TV, sometimes I do schlock like the Star Wars Holiday Special, and sometimes I do reviews of modern films that have a broad appeal, like on Sundays I am now doing Doctor Who. Usually, however, I stick to a period from about 1900 to 1980, and that's because the period after 1980 is pretty well documented. But 1900 to 1980 contains a lot of science fiction and a lot of science fiction fandom that isn't very well documented, and so part of the reason I do the show is to document it. It is live, so I will take any and all questions, comments, and nasty remarks. You can tell me, I will certainly respond to as many viewers as possible, and you can tell me if I missed something, if I'm completely full of crap, or if I just happen to be an amazingly hoopy frood, which is probably more likely. I go into a lot more depth than most reviewers. I don't just say whether I liked a film or not. I go into acting, direction, cinematography, the mechanics of making a film. And I can do this to some extent because a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I was once an actor. So I can speak with a modicum of authority. Not as much as a modern working actor, and I never ever want to give that impression, but with some authority. As they often say, those who can do, and those who can't teach. And probably my reviews are kind of like teaching. Looking down here at my thing. Hi, Captain Jesse. How are you doing tonight? Do I like PlayStation 4? I don't play the PlayStation 4. I've never had the funds to buy one. And in any case, I can't cost justify most of the games that run about $50. It's just something I can't cost justify. If I play a game, it's on my older Linux box and. Oh, gosh. Unreal Tournament 99 is my game, and it runs very nicely. Marshall says, kill you quicker than hire Marshall smash to the Marshall's death. Roll end credits. Honestly, I think if you watch the fan edit that I'm going to go through, you'll find that it is at least watchable. It's not something that makes you want to kill yourself like the regular one does. Yeah, Star Trek Online is free to play. It's just that my hardware won't run it. It's circa 2004. Buy me the laptop, and I will probably have fun playing those games. So, non-spoiler review on the fan edit. Now, the fan edit is really good. It's by a guy named Doug Baughman. I have a link to his channel in my description as well as the edit that he's done. Hey, Larry, nice to see you. And I definitely suggest you look at Baughman's channel. He's got a lot of things in there that are kind of interesting and show some of the editing that he's capable of doing, as well as some other stuff that's probably interesting to science fiction fans. You might well have a look at that one. Now, there are several different fan edits of this out there, and I have watched some of them, but I think Doug Baughman's is probably the best. Laptop or console? Yeah, if I had a laptop, I'd do it. Because I could cost justify the games because BitTorrent, excuse me, BitTorrent, pardon me. If you must watch the Star Wars Holiday Special, I suggest you do it only under 3 conditions. 1, you are a purist. You want to see everything that ever had the Star Wars name on it. 2, you're really, really high, preferably about as high as Carrie Fisher was when she was doing this thing. Or if you're a psychotic, because then the whole thing might actually make some sense to you. Otherwise, watch this fan edit, because you will enjoy yourself quite a lot more. Marshall says, fan edit equals less cringe, less story, less plot. Works great assuming it's not total cringe, not crap story, and plotless. Half of 0 is still 0. Well, I tell you, there is a story in there, and he manages to get the story. There are cringes, but it's not his fault. It's because there are things that happen that cannot be edited out without compromising the story. What he's done is he's made a story that flows pretty well. He has, in fact, taken what is just an unmitigated disaster and makes it into a coherent story. It's never going to be a great story, and Marshall says it'll never be great, but it is at least coherent. You won't want to kill yourself after watching the thing. To be honest, it is the sort of thing that I probably would have either enjoyed or given some kind of pass to when I saw it at the age 13 in 1978. And now, one of the best things about this review is really kind of good, because last week I was contacted by Doug Baughman during the preparation for this show, and I got a lot of interesting information about what he did and why. And these are insights into making a film, even when you're doing a fan edit, that I don't usually have. And it's very nice to have that stuff, because then I can bring it to you. And in fact, there's one little thing that you may learn about the disposition of the originals for this stupid thing that aren't really out there in the world right now. So this will be kind of a first with that particular news. And Marshall again says, convert an unmitigated disaster to a mitigated catastrophe. It's really not. It has a coherent story. Again, it's not going to be a great one, but it is a coherent one, and it makes sense. As always, this is a 40-year-old film, and I am firmly a believer that you can neither watch this film nor even review this film from a 2018 perspective. As with all the older films I get, you must approach it as a viewer of the time, and a lot has changed in 40 years. And if you don't know the historical context, you really can't judge it properly, so I'm going to give you some. Marshall says, okay, did they burn in hell? I hope that's the case. No, they didn't, oddly enough. And U.S. Marshall says, we'd be quiet. Hey, up to you, man. Anything you want to say. It's totally cool with me. So, life in 1978. Just to give you some simple stuff to start out with, costs of things. New house might run you $54,800. Today, that would be, and if you translate that into modern money, about $213,000. That's about right. In my market, you can probably get it for less. But for most markets, a good house, about that amount of money. Certainly better than you can get if you're trying to get something in, like, Los Angeles or even worse, San Francisco. But still a pretty well one-to-one sort of trade-off there. Larry says, was it a TV grab for ratings? Oh, yeah. The Star Wars Holiday Special as aired was simply there to kind of keep Star Wars in the minds of the public, and that's all it's there for. Fism boojum teak further back. Anything you said to me, big mistake. Yeah. The costs. Average income at that time was about $17,000. Today, that would translate into about $66,000. So you would be doing better at that time. The median income in the U.S. is around $42,000 now. Rent at that time would have been about $260, which translates into about $1,000 today. That's good. In my market, you can get a decent place for about $1,000 if it's not a family one. You certainly can't get that in large metropolitan areas. Gallon of gasoline at that time cost 63 cents, which translates into about 2,044 cents today. That's about a wash. And if you were buying Star Wars pajamas, well, depending on how big you were, whether you're a child or an adult, that might run you anywhere from about $6.50 to about $12 today. That would translate into about $25 to about $47. Not having attempted to buy any of those things, I don't know how that stacks up. Now, then there was the Tandy TRS-80. The Radio Shack Tandy TRS-80 was released in this year, and that would have cost you about $400. Today, that would translate into about $1,500. That makes sense, actually. That was a new computer, one of the first home computers ever made, and $1,500 would be about right for something that is a brand new high-end computer today. Now, that computer got a reputation in IT, and years later is being called the Trash 80. And that's because the first edition in particular was very, very buggy. It was one of the first personal computers ever made, but it was not an IBM compatible computer as we know today. It did not run MS-DOS. It ran something called Tandy TRS-DOS, and it would never have run MS-DOS programs if you tried. But until 1982, the TRS-80 was actually the best-selling personal computer line. It outsold the Apple II series by a factor of 5, so it was a big thing. Starbase operations by BBS ran on a TRS-80 Model 3. Yep, that was another thing that happened. This year was the first year that there was computer bulletin board systems. Now, as an aside, what you're seeing here is my first computer, or rather, it's my father's first business computer that he got in 1978. It is the Ohio Scientific C8PDF computer. It was billed as IBM compatible, but again, not what we would think of today. It did not run DOS. It was not a PC. You could not run DOS programs, but you could, at least in theory, take the information that was on the 8-inch floppies that I think at that point were 480K, and you could load this information into an IBM mainframe. Never did it, never even thought about trying, but at least theoretically you could. This was not, however, my first entry into computers. I had taken a programming class the year before, in 1977, at a summer school course when I was in middle school. They used teletype terminals, which is what you're seeing here, that connected to the Lincoln Public Schools mainframe via acoustic modem, which is what you're seeing here. It was about 300 bits per second, and I learned the basic programming language at that time. But that C8PDF was the first computer that I had my hands on, and it launched me into 40 years in IT. Marshall says, "Ooh, shiny," in the only way, in a way, only a true fart computer geek could consider shiny. Yes, absolutely, I considered it shiny. I was one of the first people. I was the only one in middle school and later even high school that was turning in papers that were printed on a dot matrix printer. Your dad's office used CP/M. Yeah, there were computers out near that time that started using the operating system CP/M. Digital Equipment Corporation terminals. Yes, this is a DEC something writer. I've forgotten what it is, but that's what we used. You didn't have a monitor. You typed things in, and it spit out on the paper. In point of fact, I got someone to give me an account on when I went to college on a mainframe there, and I ran the computer game Trek. There are somewhere deep in the labyrinths of the landfills and dumps in Lincoln, Nebraska, page upon page upon page of this double-wide green and white paper on which I was playing this game. Still play it today. It's still out there, believe it or not. Other things that were happening in 1978, one of the biggest ones was the Jonestown Massacre. Now, to give you some background on this, I've got to go a little bit back farther in time. In 1958, a cult called the People's Temple was formed by Jim Jones in Indianapolis. In 1956, he moved it to Ukiah, California, and then in 1971 to San Francisco. But between 1974 and 1977, a group of these temple members followed Jones to a compound in Guyana, South America, that they called Jonestown. Now, the reason they did this was because Jones was being charged with financial fraud, and they simply wanted to flee the country. I know the guy, Marshall says, who wrote both Trek and Wind Trek, Joe Jaworski, worked with him in California. That is cool. That is cool. I've played Trek a zillion times. If you got an account on sdf.org, and if you're any kind of computer geek, I suggest it. Trek is still out there. Yeah, Drink the Kool-Aid came from this cult. I'll get to that in a second. So on November 17th, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan visited Jonestown with some observers and journalists at the request of the former People's Temple members and the relatives of current members. This is a cult. This is a complete cult. And several of those members who were in the compound asked Ryan for help returning to the United States, and this angered Jones, who feared, rightly, that his followers would defect, and he ordered the group to kill the 5 witnesses, including the congressman. Fortunately, that never happened. However, later that night, on November 17th, the Star Wars Holiday Special aired. And then, on November 18th, the day after, Jones commanded his followers to drink poisoned punch, and many of them did it willingly, but is evidence that some of them had to be forced to do so by other cult members or by armed guards. And there was, in that massacre, a death toll of 900 people, more than 300 of which were children. And Jones was himself found dead of gunshot wounds. Some other things going on there. Gold had reached an all-time high of $200 per ounce. I invite you to laugh at that compared to what it's worth now. The world's population was estimated at about 4.4 billion, and after 30 years, the Volkswagen Beetle stopped production. Also that year, Roman Polanski fled to France, mere hours before he was going to be formally sentenced for rape and other charges against a child. He remains in exile today. But the amazing thing is the Hollywood left loves him. Meryl Streep has praised him. Quentin Tarantino is an apologist for him, and this is why if he directs a Star Trek movie, I will never watch it. World unemployment had risen after several decades of full employment. And another fun thing that happened this year was the oil tanker Amico Cadiz ran aground on the coast of Brittany in France and created an oil slick 18 miles wide and 80 miles long that covered about 200 miles of the Brittany coast. In the U.S., well, of course, on November 17th, the Star Wars Holiday Special aired. Jimmy Carter was president at that time. Serial killer David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam, was sentenced that year to 6 consecutive life sentences for having killed 8 people in New York, and he remains in prison to this day. The Senate ratified the second of the Torrijos-Carter treaties, which guaranteed that the United States would hand back control of the Panama Canal by the end of 1999, which did happen. The U.S. had had control since 1903. The United States then banned all of the latest computer technology, could not sell it to the Soviet Union, still the Cold War. And the U.S. stopped production of the neutron bomb, which you don't hear much about today. Interesting sort of weapon, unlike a nuclear weapon. It kills the people, but it keeps buildings and infrastructure intact. U.S. had a teacher's strike. The U.S. dollar plunged to new record lows, but the first female astronauts were around. There was Shannon Lucid, who became the first American woman to visit the Mir space station, Margaret Ray Seddon, Catherine Sullivan, who became the first American woman to perform a spacewalk, Judith Resnick, Anna Fisher, and Sally Ride, who became the first American woman in space. Israel, as always, was having problems, but Israel and Egypt that year signed the Camp David Accords, which ended a 31-year state of war between the two nations that had existed since the creation of the State of Israel. Israel attacked Lebanon in a retaliation for a bus hijacking that had occurred in Tel Aviv. Now, interesting thing about what was going on in some of the religious world, the Catholic side of things in Rome. Pope Paul VI died, and then October 26th, Pope Paul I became Pope, but he died 33 days later, only 33 days later. And we got Pope John Paul II, who was around for quite a long time, and if you didn't live through any of his, I suggest you read him up. He's a very interesting guy. He was attempted to be assassinated once, which caused him to create what they called the Pope Mobile. Because he used to go everywhere. He just did a ton of going all over the world. And so they made this thing that he could sit in that was basically surrounded by bulletproof glass. So he could not, the attempt in his life might not happen again. In Japan, Naomi Urema became the first person to reach the North Pole in a solo expedition, and Japanese car imports accounted at that point for more than half the U.S. import market. In Great Britain, they had a public service strike that was problematic. The European Court of Human Rights found the UK government guilty of mistreatment of prisoners in Northern Ireland. There has been, for a long time now, centuries, of some level of problems between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, and they were having problems with outright terrorism, so that's where that came from. And this year, the world's first human that was conceived through in vitro fertilization, Louise Brown, was born on July 25th in the UK. Now, she was called a test tube baby by the press, and that's something that stuck. We still hear it today. The whole thing was done by Robert Edward, and he won the Nobel Prize in 2010 for that. A few other things. The Dominican Republic became independent from Great Britain. Spain established a new constitution. Sweden became the first nation to ban aerosol sprays that are thought to do damage to the Earth's protective ozone layer. And in fact, that went worldwide. We do not have aerosol sprays now in the United States. In Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, the Prime Minister and 3 black leaders agreed on the transfer to black majority rule. Other things. Illinois Bell created the first ever cellular phone network, but that would not become standard until the 1990s. And then there's Space Invaders. The computer game Space Invaders launched a huge craze for computer video games. These would lead to video arcades that I went to a lot. These were buildings that basically had, or businesses that had lots and lots of video games in them, arcade video games, where you paid about a quarter. These are now gone because why would we have them when we have all these fun, home games? There it says Kennedy chose to not to use a bulletproof clear top on the car in Dallas. Yeah. Afterwards, now it's about impossible to attack the president for any number of reasons. Films that were popular in 1978. Grease, Saturday Night Fever, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, National Lampoon's Animal House, Jaws 2, Heaven Can Wait, Star Wars, Revenge of the Pink Panther, and The Deer Hunter. In music, the Bee Gees were big with their songs Saturday Night Live and Stayin' Alive. Paul McCartney and Wings was big. John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John, as the result of Grease, in which they starred, were also big. Although, funny thing, at the time, my friends and I called her Oblivious Neutron Bomb. The Rolling Stones were big, and the Commodore song 3 Times a Lady was huge. Yup. Oh, man. Disco was big. Yes, disco was big. And Marshall says Grease was the word on Saturday night. Yeah. My sister loved Grease. I thought it was okay, but she would sing those songs over and over and over and over. See, I was 13, so she would have been about 10. I got to hear those songs from that thing over and over. Now, interesting thing on TV. Varieties had been very big in the 1970s. Variety shows where you had, all kinds of different acts. You would have musical numbers, you would have stand-up, you might have sketches, Very, very big throughout most of the 1970s. However, by 1978, it was starting to wane. Public consciousness was moving away from that in terms of something else, which makes the decision to attempt to turn Star Wars into a variety show, which is what this piece of crap as a whole did, kind of weird. People were not really watching that anymore. But shows that were big at that time: Happy Days, Little House on the Prairie, The Rockford Files, Good Morning America, Saturday Night Live, back when they were actually funny, Wheel of Fortune, Charlie's Angels, Quincy M.E., The Muppet Show, Chips, which, by the way, had a character played by Michael Dorn, who was a recurring police officer on that, The Love Boat, Three's Company, and there was something big that happened that year. Larry says Carol Burnett show was over. Yes, Carol Burnett was over by then, although she did have some other specials past then. But she had basically a variety show, and as I talk about the costumer for that, you'll see a lot of interesting things there. But yeah, Carol Burnett was big in the mid-1970s, kind of went away. Too bad. I've seen stuff from her in the 1970s that are now on YouTube, and they're usually very damn funny, particularly if you find some of the outtakes. Those are great. However, in 1978, on October 14th and 21st, the castaways of Gilligans Island were rescued after 15 years. However, Tina Louise did not reprise her role as Ginger Grant. However, a few months later, on a reunion cruise, the castaways were re-shipwrecked on the exact same island, directly due to Gilligan's utter incompetence. And for some reason, the remaining castaways did not murder Gilligan on the spot and leave his body for the sharks. But fortunately, within a few days, the castaways were rescued again by the Navy, and a year later, Mr. Howell opened a resort on that island, and basically they had Love Boat-style adventures at that point. And in 1981, the Harlem Globetrotters visited the island, and you can barely see it in this picture, but they faced off against a team made up of robots. Yeah. Okay, fashion of the time, men's fashion. Things had changed a bit since the 1960s. You didn't see quite the same amount of color that you did in the 60s. 60s were a very colorful era for clothes. And what you can see on this side is what a fairly well-dressed man might wear. The styles had changed. This would have been more like Sunday go-to-meeting clothes. This was not what you would wear necessarily in public. However, I can tell you, I was at a parochial school. Marshall says, spoiler, the Globetrotters won. Yeah, well, what would you expect? They enlisted Gilligan in their stupid team. It was all for dumb laughs. But fashions at this point, again, this is stuff that you might see men wearing under, relatively structured conditions where you needed a suit. I myself went to a parochial school at that time that required a uniform. So at that time, I was wearing a suit, a tie, bell bottoms, like you see here. Bell bottoms were big, and platform shoes. Everybody had platform shoes, not necessarily the platform, but heels. I certainly remember wearing heels at that time. The other side here is what your average, reasonably dressed teenage boy might wear. You can see, you're getting away with jeans, you're getting away with different kinds of pants, still bell bottoms, still probably those shoes. But you got shirts that were a little more colorful. I remember those lines across the side had a lot of those. Aside from my Star Trek t-shirts, which were becoming a thing back then. Larry says, Battle of the Network Stars. Oh, God, yes, Battle of the Network Stars. Watched very often by myself, solely so that I could see people like Linda Carter in a swimsuit. In terms of women's fashions, a couple of interesting things about this pic. The one on this side is basically a group photo that was taken for some reason, but I thought it was really good. You can see things are starting to evolve a bit more, a bit looser clothing. You didn't have the same kind of underwear that you did in the 50s, that's for sure. That was all going away. And on this side, you can see a cutout of a fashion magazine of the time. And you can see that women's dresses were becoming a little more flowy, lower hemlines. You know, you started out in the 60s with 50s with hemlines like this. By the end of the 70s, they were up to here, 60s rather, and then by the 70s, they were back down to here. In fact, there's a joke that the skipper makes in Rescue from Gilligans Island, where he says to Gilligan, boy, we really missed out. You know, hemlines went from here all the way up to here, and now they're back down to here again. So a neat little joke. And you can see here, generally more, loose. The hemlines were lower, a little more flowery, a little more loose. Still some colors in there, but again, this decade started to lose all of the colors that we had seen as part of the 1960s. In terms of science fiction fandom, well, as always, we had television programs. Not a ton of them that were great, but with the release of Star Wars, everybody wanted to get on a project. Project UFO, Logan's Run, which was a TV series that they made into a TV series. It was a movie. Oh, this one. That one, when it rolls around again. Believe it or not, they tried to do Doctor Strange. That was from Doctor Strange TV. They also had Spider-Man on TV as a TV series. There's Leia in there. They had The Incredible Hulk in a TV series. Battlestar Galactica was now a TV series. The Man from Atlantis, about a merman, was a TV series. And The New Avengers was out there. Larry says, Jim Backus died soon after the last Gilligan's Island special. Yeah, he was not even in the Harlem Globetrotters one. His supposed son, Thurston Howell III, whom we'd never heard of before, was in that. You see here Quark, that was another one. Wonder Woman was another one. These were all stuff that, again, to some extent were influenced by the fact that, hey, Star Wars is huge. We need to get like superheroes and stuff like that. Now, some of them predated Star Wars, but a lot of this was a reaction to the fact that Star Wars was big, and studios and network execs said, holy crap, we got to get us some science fiction. And so they did. In terms of films, well, as always, Sturgeon's Law holds. We had a lot of science fiction films starting to come out. Again, on the heels of Star Wars, everybody, all of the studios went, oh my God, we have to have some science fiction. So you're seeing some here that are bad. The Cat from Outer Space. I don't know about the Medusa Touch. I've never looked at it. Yeah, I've never seen that one either. Death Sport, which is remembered by some people. Space 1999, Larry had finished up by then. It was, I think, 1974, 75. So that was gone by then. Oh, Kiss. Kiss meets the Phantom of the Park. Just an excuse to put Kiss into something on TV, and it was terrible. Sturgeon's Law holds. 90% of science fiction is crap. And in fact, 90% of everything is crap. But we have Superman, great one that I'll be reviewing. War of the Robots, which I won't. Boys from Brazil was interesting. And Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. That is a great one that I may work in. I might stick that one in the week of Christmas. That might be good. And, of course, the Star Wars Holiday Special. Swarm with a bunch of bees. Piranha pretty much tells you what that is. And Warlords of Atlantis. Again, Coma was a pretty good movie. But Slithus... Blazer Blast, which I have reviewed, it's terrible. So again, Sturgeon's Law holds. 90% of it was crap. But again, it was because these studios were going, oh my God, we got to get science fiction, something out there. So they all worked on that. Now, literature at the time. Fan interest was sliding away from literature as the best science fiction around and more into movies. Star Trek was becoming to be very big by then. Next year, which I'll be reviewing, Star Trek the Motion Picture was out. But at this point, we had pretty much moved away from the magazines. There were some still out there, and they did some still, produce short stories and novellas and novels and stuff like that. But for the most part, writers were now moving straight into novels. They were not going anywhere else. And the novels tended to be pretty good. But the public consciousness in science fiction was moving away from novels and into movies. And as always, fans of this time, we had our fanzines. And these were stuff where people could write their own fan fiction, do their own art. And fortunately, by this time, we had finally started to get away from the mimeograph machine. Now, sometimes it was still used. You can see here, sometimes we can still see the blue ink where the mimeograph machine was used. But we started to have photocopiers, Xerox machines, which made it a whole hell of a lot easier. I've talked before in other Fandom of the Era things about the mimeograph machine. I'm going to talk about it here. But that advancement of the photocopier was a gigantic thing for fandom. It meant that instead of doing this horrible thing with these drums and purple ink, we could just put them on there and reproduce as many as we wanted. And as always, we used fanzines. They were popular right up until the mid-1980s or so, and maybe a little bit later. And there were tons and tons of them, and they tended to be more Star Trek than anything else at that point. They moved away from being science fiction, general science fiction, more to Star Trek. And you always hoped that you made the money back that it took to print the things in the first place. You would sell them to your local fan club, like here in Lincoln, Nebraska, Starbase Andromeda, which still meets today. You would sell it to those guys. If you knew people around the country, you might, do a swap with them or sell something. And now we had just straight up Star Trek conventions. And so you could go to conventions and sell them there. Did you necessarily make back the money? Not necessarily, but you gave it a shot. Larry says, Jaws in 1975 made the blockbuster summer movie a staple every year. Yes, it did. And Close Encounters came out in December of 1977. Yeah, but it was still in theaters. This was a time when if a movie was popular, they kept it in theaters. They did not assume, because it didn't exist, that a film was going to be living most of its life as a DVD or Blu-ray. They kept these things in the theaters for a long time because that was the only place you were ever going to see them. So, that is my Life in the 1970s piece, which, by the way, is going to be pulled out as a clip. So, with all of that said, I can finally issue myself a...
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. All hands, prepare for incoming spoilers.
Yes, it is a spoiler alert. And that is because I am the Fandi Master, and that means that the fandom is strong with me. And that means that nothing is new, nothing is original, and at worst I figure it out about a half an hour early. This is not a boast, this is not a brag. This is, sadly, where you find yourself after having watched, read, and listened to about 100 years' worth of science fiction. You simply can't see the new stuff for the entire century that came before, and it does sometimes inhibit your ability to enjoy things. That's not the case with the Star Wars Holiday Special. You just didn't enjoy it. And speaking of that, as I often do, I'm going to go through the plot. I'm going to go through the plot twice. First for the original, and then for the fan edit, because the fan edit makes so much more sense. Now, the plot of the original, in no particular order, because I don't remember the order, and I never want to watch that thing again, ever, to find out exactly what order this stuff happens in. The general plot is Han Solo and Chewbacca are trying to get back to the Wookiee homeworld for Life Day, and they're interfered with by Imperial ships and fighters that they have to fight off, all of which is stock footage from Star Wars. Can you fast forward to a live stream? Well, I am. Oh, can you fast forward to live stream? I'm going to try to make this as short as possible. I'm going to try to make it as short as possible. That's the basic plot. But in around that, Chewbacca's family watches various recreational programs. All of them go on forever. They seem, each of them, like they're just about to end. You get to the point where, okay, they're getting to the end here, and then it keeps going. And it is fantastically boring. These include a holographic Cirque du Soleil. Really, it was holographic Cirque du Soleil. They were just getting their start then. And it was fantastically boring. They have an instructional video with Harvey Korman as a malfunctioning robot, which was achieved by slowing down or stopping the videotape that they had of him. And it was fantastically boring. There was a cooking show with Harvey Korman as the hostess in drag with 4 arms, who stirred and whipped and stirred in a frenetic pace until it was fantastically boring. There was a bar scene from Mos Eisley with Harvey Korman as an alien who had a hole in the top of his head through which he would pour his drinks. And it was incredibly boring. There was a B. Arthur as a bartender in the cantina, and she had a musical number that was fantastically boring. One thing you can say to its credit, they got most of the costumes from the cantina that was actually in Star Wars. Unfortunately, the soundstage was so hot that the actors in them kept passing out. They watched a Jefferson Starship number with weird lighting that made their microphones look like pink dildos, and it was fantastically boring. There was a softcore VR porn for Itchy, Chewbacca's father, consisting of Diane Carroll first telling Itchy how she could tell he was thinking sexual thoughts, and then singing a musical number, and that was just uncomfortable to watch. All of this occurs under a VR helmet that looks exactly like a 1970s hairdryer, and the entire thing took place in the living room where Mala and Lumpy could see it. Now, you know, only Itchy could see this softcore porn, but the idea of doing it inside a room where both of these people are was really uncomfortable. And of course, after a while, the musical number became just shockingly boring. Two families of Chewbacca's family also call Luke, who looks like hell. I'll talk about that in a minute. Leia, who's out of her mind on blow, and neither of them care very much that Han and Chewie haven't shown up yet. Now, Mala is Chewie's wife, and she calls a trader, whose name is Son Dan, who first reassures Mala that Han and Solo are on the way, and later shows up with some presents that tie into all these stupid musical numbers. Now, Lumpy, Chewie's son, watches a cartoon, which is the only good thing in this entire special. And it's all just fantastically boring, with the exception of that cartoon. It doesn't make the slightest bit of sense. Han and Chewie eventually show up, which leads to the death of a stormtrooper, after which Chewie, his family, and a bunch of other Wookiees walk through space to a tree where Luke, Leia, and the droids have inexplicably arrived. Leia, who is out of her mind on blow, sings a song, and the whole thing ends with the Chewbacca and his family holding hands at the dinner table for a long, fantastically boring time. And scene. Now, that description is better than the special itself. If you want to watch the special, just go back and watch my plot of it. It's terrible. Now, the abridged 45-minute watchable edition is much better. It's a very good fan edit. Now, one of the things that the editor did, which I thought was great, they do... Now, if you watch the very beginning of my show, I did a thing because... on TV, this thing was preempting Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk. And there was a preemption notice at the beginning of it. And so I did my own. And he did his own, only his is much better. He takes, the voiceover informs the viewer that the Incredible Hulk will not be seen tonight, but it's over footage from the 2008 film starring Ed Norton. So it's great. And then it's followed by that CBS special presentation. If you caught the very beginning of the show, I have the exact same thing. Now, the editor here puts in an opening crawl. There was no opening crawl in the original. It just started and then went off the rails. So his opening crawl reads, Episode 4.5, The Holiday Special. Chewbacca, no longer content with just being a wanted smuggler, is now seen as an all-out terrorist in the eyes of the evil Galactic Empire. Realizing that he actually has a family to feed, Chewbacca and Han Solo race to the Wookiee home planet of Kashyyyk in order to celebrate Life Day and to make up for the fact that they can never live a normal life again. Meanwhile, Princess Leia struggles with an unknown illness, causing her to slur her words and stumble when walking. Oh well, at least the cartoon is pretty cool. So that's the opening crawl. Was the original 2 hours with commercials? Yes, it was. They had commercial breaks, which he edited out very good, particularly in one point I'm going to mention. Star Wars Holiday Special sucked and still is better than Last Jedi. No. The Last Jedi, at least, is not stultifyingly boring. The holiday special is not good. It's not so bad it's good. It's just fantastically boring is what it is. So going on with the story of the fan edit. Leaving Tatooine for Kashyyyk, which, by the way, was not called Kashyyyk in this. Nobody really knew what the Wookiee homeworld was going to be called. The only time a planet is referenced, it's called Kashyyyk. And they're leaving for Kashyyyk in order to do Life Day. But they're dogged by Imperial cruisers, but eventually make the jump to hyperspace and elude them. Meanwhile, on Kashyyyk, in Chewbacca's home, Malla, who is Chewie's wife, worries that Chewie hasn't arrived yet, along with the father of Chewie, Itchy. How they named some of these is just appalling. But Itchy is there. In this, because of the fan edit, you could probably ditch Itchy completely. But he's there, and he's trying to talk to Malla. Malla then calls Luke Skywalker on a hidden transmitter they have, and to tell him that Chewie and Han haven't arrived, and Luke reassures Malla that Chewie and Han will arrive soon, before an equipment failure forces he and R2 to stop a smoke machine, which I'll talk about when I get into his character. Malla then calls Saldan, who is a rebel sympathizer and a traitor who has an Imperial officer in his store at the time, so he covertly assures Malla that Han and Chewie will arrive soon, and also tells her that he is going to arrive soon by himself. Meanwhile, Darth Vader, in one of the 2 times we see him, and it is stock footage with James Earl Jones' voice over it, orders suspected rebels found, even if it means searching every household in the system. And so back at Chewie's family's house, Malla and Lumpy, remember Lumpy is Chewie's son, busy themselves with some household chores. Marshall says cyanide will fix this plot, applied liberally to the writer and director, and shove in the people. It's such a mess. When we get to writers and directors, it's a huge mess. So, meanwhile, the Millennium Falcon has unfortunately come out of hyperspace into a nest of TIE fighters near Kashyyyk and has to fight their way through. Meanwhile, back on Kashyyyk, an Imperial officer gives a public announcement. There is a blockade that has been set up around Kashyyyk. That's what they called it. And then there's a knock on the door, and it's Saldan, who's brought various presents for the Wookiees, one of which is for Lumpy, and it's some kind of receiver for rebel transmissions. And he assures them that since he made it through the blockade, so can Han and Chewie. Malla then calls Princess Leia and C-3PO. Leia is having problems with her speech and her ability to remain upright. However, she speaks to Saldan and asks him to look after the Wookiees until Han and Chewie arrives, and tell Malla that she will contact her again soon, which never happens. Itchy is the distant relative of cousin from the Addams family. Yeah, he's so short. That's one of those things that really strikes you. For a race that grows to be about 7 feet tall, Chewie's son, Lumpy, is really short, and so is his father. You know, you'd think they didn't. Meanwhile, above Kashyyyk, Han and Chewie have arrived, and they decide to land on the north side, whichever that is, which is farther away from Chewie's home, but will avoid the Imperial patrol. Marshall says he's a micro Wookiee. Yeah, genetic, exactly. It's weird. So back in the Wookiee home, Lumpy hears a spaceship overhead, and assuming that it's Han and Chewie, the family rush to the door, only to discover it is Imperial troops. The troops demand to know where the missing Chewbacca is. They examine everyone's identification, including Saldan. Now, this is one of the biggest and best changes about this thing. In the original, Saldan is a bumbling idiot throughout. In this, because of the way it is edited, he now becomes a competent rebel who runs interference with the Wookiees while behaving occasionally like something of a buffoon to throw them off. But it looks clearly like an act, because the rest of the time he's totally serious. When he's doing this, it's just to throw the Imperials off. The troops search the Wookiee home, nearly discovering Malla's surreptitious transmitter, and eventually order Saldan to leave at gunpoint. Mala then suggests that Lumpy go back and take a look at his new receiver to take his mind off things. And Lumpy watches an animated adventure of Luke, Han, Leia, and Chewie. And that is the best part of this whole thing. So, the plot for that animated adventure. During a search for something called a talisman, the Millennium Falcon crashes on the water planet of Pana. And taking an X-Wing, Luke and the droids follow the Falcon to the Pana. They arrive, and they run into Boba Fett. This is Boba Fett's very first appearance. And he claims that he wants to help them after he saves Luke from a giant monster that attacks him from behind. They all board the Falcon, where Han has been infected by a mysterious sleeping virus caused by the talisman, and then Luke contracts the same virus. Boba Fett and Chewie then go to a Pana city to get to the cure, but once they're in this Imperial-occupied city, Fett instructs Chewie to stay behind while he gets the cure. And then Boba Fett contacts Darth Vader, the second time and the last time that we will see Darth Vader in this thing. Back on the Falcon, as C-3PO is caring for Han and Luke, R2-D2 intercepts the transmission between Vader and Fett. So they evade the Imperials, Boba Fett and Chewie, and they return back to the Falcon with the cure. And after everyone recovers from the virus, they learn of Fett's true allegiances. Fett then blasts away in his jetpack, promising that they will meet again. And then everyone escapes from the planet back to the Rebel base aboard the Falcon, and scene for that. And it is the only good part of the whole thing. And that's why the editor left it there intact. So, after all it's done, meanwhile, the searching Imperials essentially destroy all of Lumpy's possessions and toys during their search of his room, and the Imperial officer rather nastily tells Lumpy he has to go clean it up. The Imperial officer then orders one stormtrooper to remain behind to wait for Chewie's return. But in reassembling some of the stuff in his room, Lumpy's receiver inadvertently picks up an Imperial transmission, and the stormtrooper begins threatening Lumpy. Fortunately, at this time, Han and Chewie arrive. There is a brief, very brief struggle in which the stormtrooper loses his blaster and falls through a defective railing outside the home, plunging to his death. And as you can see behind me, I have the Ralph McQuarrie concept art that was actually used for this, and these Wookiees live like 1,000 feet in the air, so he dies. But one of the fun things that the editor put in, as the stormtrooper's going over and about to die, he gives out a Wilhelm scream. It's not in the original. Doug Baughman, the editor, added that. I thought it was very fun when I heard it. Chewie and his family then share a happy reunion with Han, and Han shortly leaves to go guard the Falcon because they've got it parked, all that. Then Sondan arrives in time for an Imperial officer who's putting out a general call for the dead stormtrooper to turn on his comlink. Saldan then tells the officer that the stormtrooper had stolen food from the Wookiee as well as cleaned Saul out from his wares, and then took to the hills. And this explanation works for some reason. Saul then leaves the Wookiees to celebrate Life Day at the base of the Tree of Life with a gathering of Wookiees all dressed in red, and Luke, Leia, Han, and the droids appear for no apparent reason. Leia, still having health problems, gives a brief and generally incomprehensible speech about the meaning of Life Day and the Tree of Life. And it ends with Chewie and his family holding hands for a pretty long time, but it's okay because the pace is otherwise all right. And the camera pulls out to outside their treehouse. And then a fun part happens, something the editor did. The editor took the credits and he turned it into something like we would see today. Where you have credits on one side, I guess this way, credits on one side rolling, and then next to that, right next to it, some kind of advertisement. But the ad he found is some Japanese ad that has all the Star Wars characters in it. You have no idea what's going on. And it's selling something that I'm not even sure is Star Wars related. But it's fun that he put that in there. I thought that was a fun little thing. And scene for the one that has been edited. As you can see, he took out all the stupid. He took out all of the musical numbers. He took out anything that was particularly stupid. He made Saul Dan into something that is a coherent and useful rebel who does things in order to help the Wookiees. It's really well done. That alone was a huge, huge change that you have to give it to Doug for. That was really great. Now my cringe moments. In the original, God, are you kidding? I mean, the entire thing is one cringe moment after another with musical numbers that go on far too long, make little to no sense in the context of the story, and are just fantastically boring. Makes you wonder, what is this stupid thing about? Who greenlit it? And who thought it was a good idea to shoehorn a variety show into Star Wars? So, as I said before, it's not good. It's not so bad it's good. It is amazingly boring. Just fantastically boring if you're watching. It doesn't make sense. The musical numbers are boring. I first thought that when I first saw it. I was 2 months shy of my 14th birthday, and my opinion, like nobody else, everybody else's, has never changed. I have suffered through this thing 3 times in my life. Once when it was first aired, once when I did a commentary for it when I was doing a podcast, and then once this year when I discovered a very high-quality version of it here on YouTube. It appears to be a first-gen VHS copy. That is, somebody taped it, kept it around for so long, and now it has been digitized. And I think it probably is. If you're a Star Wars purist and you want to watch it, it is the best quality one that you could find. Now, I doubt that I'll ever watch this crap again. And again, the only reason you should watch it, you're a purist, you're incredibly high, or you're a psychotic. Larry says, shtick to confuse stormtroopers. Yeah, it's really rather amazing what they did with Saldan. What he did with Saldan, the editing he did is an amazing job. It turns him into a competent rebel who is just acting like an idiot from time to time in order to throw the Imperials off. It works very well. Now, in terms of the abridged 45-minute watchable edition, I have no cringe moments. I really don't. Anything cringe-worthy is in there because it could not be edited out with compromising what story there is. And that is not the editor's fault. Great moments. Talking again about the abridged 45-minute watchable edition. This is, to me, frankly, a brilliant edit. It ejects everything that is stupid in the original, preserves what plot there is, makes a coherent story out of it. Again, what remains that is stupid could not be edited out without compromising the story. So, Doug Baughman. As I said, in preparing this thing, I mentioned on Doug's YouTube video that I was going to be doing it, and he contacted me. I linked to his channel again. Take a look at it, subscribe to it. I think it has a lot of fun content that you'll like. And he had some specific points that I thought would be useful to share because they indicate some of what he did for these edits that make it as good as it is. And again, this is stuff that I love to have from this show and very rarely get. Most of the time I say, well, I think it probably went like this based on my experience. Think it probably went like that. In this case, we got the source telling me what's going on. So I love that. I wish I had more of it. Larry says, maybe a story was not the priority of the original. Oh, God, yeah. No, the story was just there to string together all these stupid musical numbers. But again, Doug Baughman takes that out. He makes it into a coherent story. Not a great story. It'll never be a great story, but a coherent one. One that at age 13 I might have enjoyed a bit and would have given a pass to some of the stupid on because it was 13. So Doug Baughman's notes on this. The opening crawl was made on a make-your-own Star Wars crawl editor on the original Star Wars website, although he doesn't know if it's there still. The special effects footage was recycled, of course, in the original. And Doug wanted to lift the best footage that he could from better source materials. Now, he originally tried the Blu-rays, but the contrast between the quality of the Blu-rays and then the quality of this piece of crap that he had to work with was too distracting. So he eventually ended up lifting footage from the 1997 special edition release Hong Kong Video did on CDs, that is, video CDs, something that doesn't exist anymore. And then he replaced the stock footage with those, and it does look quite a lot better. Yeah, Larry Sawyer says, no Harvey Korman, no B. Arthur. No, the plot that I just gave you is the plot. There are no musical numbers whatsoever, including B. Arthur, including the cantina, all gone, just to make a story that makes some sense. The cartoon, he said, was taken from the Blu-ray. He thought maybe he could edit that as well to make it look more like the one that was on there. But it was best part of the special edition, so he just left it in. As a note, I very much agree with this choice. This stupid thing is basically just junk without that cartoon. The exterior shots of the family's treehouse were actually from a high-res of the original Ralph McQuarrie concept art, because that was concept art. It was concept art they did for Star Wars. It wasn't ever intended to be put on screen. What you see behind me is the exact same thing that Doug Baughman did. I found the best one that I could. It is cropped somewhat to fit the 16:9 aspect ratio that I have. But again, he did the same thing. The end credits. Those were again lifted from the Star Wars VCDs. He sped them up, added the promo in a box the way that movies and TV do today. And Doug has actually worked in that industry, so putting that stuff together was something that he could do fairly easily. Now, he has a list of what some of his favorite edits, and I have to say, a lot of them I didn't notice. Some of them are so good I did not notice. He says at 4 minutes, 10 seconds. Originally, there was a lot more on the computer screen that Chewbacca's wife pulled up, but Doug seamlessly shortened it. I certainly agree with this. I didn't notice it, but that's probably because I have no desire to ever go back and watch that original ever again. So kudos to Doug for doing it. The more of that you can pull out, the better, because it will speed up the pace, and that is necessary in this thing. At 17 minutes, 15 seconds, when they open the door and the stormtroopers are there. Now, keep in mind, there was a commercial break. The stormtroopers show up. That was supposed to be your hook to keep you through the next commercial, which is what television is all about. But he edited out the commercial break and got very lucky that the whole thing flows together. Stormtroopers show up. Next action immediately happens rather than a commercial break, and it works very well. I agree with that. At 20 minutes, 3 seconds, Doug was able to edit out an entire musical number very seamlessly. I totally agree. At around 20:08, there's an officer who is sitting down suddenly. It looks like a continuity error, but Doug believes it still works. And that was another thing I had not noticed, other than he got rid of that god-awful Jefferson Starship number. I had not noticed this minor continuity error. I agree with him. It totally flows. Doug says, in his own words, quote, "My basic mission was to make a special that a kid would have actually wanted to watch in 1978. I'm sure a kid would have forgiven the recycled footage, and when I first watched it, I knew what they were doing, and I thought, well, that's weird, but, it's TV. Back to what Doug said. And the sitcom-like set had the story actually flowed the entire time. I didn't get to see this until I was a teen in the 1990s after spending $20 on a bootleg tape. Needless to say, I felt the same disappointment that kids everywhere did in the 1970s. So, yeah, he's absolutely right. My response to all this, I didn't say this to him, but I'd seen this thing at the age of 13, 2 months shy of my birthday. I was completely stoked for it because in fandom, we'd been told about how there was going to be this new badass character named Boba Fett in it, complete badass. I distinctly remember sitting down to watch this piece of crap. I was at first totally confused and then rapidly bored out of my mind watching solely because it was Star Wars. And this new badass character was supposed to be in it. But then said badass character appeared in the cartoon, and it was disappointing. First, because it was a cartoon, and then second, because Boba Fett doesn't really do anything that's very badass. It was just Darth Vader telling the audience that he was the best bounty hunter in the galaxy without Boba Fett actually showing us anything that particularly indicated he was the best bounty hunter. Now, I will tell you that one of the things that makes a Fandi master, unfortunately, is watching this thing at least once. But It is also watching how things evolve over time. And one of the perfect examples is Boba Fett. Boba Fett has never been particularly badass on the screen. The reputation that he has is totally undeserved from anything that we see on screen. He mostly just walks around and is then eaten by the Sarlacc. His reputation is based solely on this cartoon and the pre-release hype for both the holiday special and The Empire Strikes Back. Boba Fett on screen is not a badass. Not ever. He got that reputation solely from the marketing. And fans believed the marketing and attributed more to the character than we ever saw on screen. Boba Fett is no more badass than Captain Phasma, and for precisely the same reasons. The difference in Phasma's case is that we now have the internet, and fans can instantly, communicate to each other and cut through all the hype. But pre-internet, we'd hear this, marketing, and we'd believe that and tend to overlook reality. And that is how Boba Fett got his undeserved reputation. We never see him being a badass, ever. Not once. It is solely based on the pre-marketing. Now, a little bit more in Doug's own words on this. This is trivia, and this is the part where you're going to learn something about the disposition of the original on this that I do not believe has ever been told. So this is a first on Tales from SYL Ranch. He says, quote, Lucasfilm at least had one perfect copy of this in their archives at one time in the mid-1990s. And I'm sure that would still be the case, because even after Lucas's comments, he said that if he had a sledgehammer in the time, he would destroy every copy of this. He probably would still have a copy, because what Doug says, because I doubt they would get completely rid of it. Plus, they put the cartoon on Blu-ray. They had to have an original somewhere for that. And he says, I quote, I worked on the Fox studio lot, and the studio archivist told me that he was given a broadcast quality 3/4-inch tape as a present from Lucasfilm. Unfortunately, he himself lost it in the 1994 Northridge earthquake. I do know that around 17 years or so ago, when the Fox network was airing the movies, they approached Lucasfilm about airing this special as a retrospective, but Lucasfilm said no. And it was shortly before he started working at Fox, but somebody had told him that. Also, when Disney acquired Lucasfilm, he asked them if that this was available, and he was told that it was on the official list, but this was right after the acquisition, and the list may have been tentative. And they probably have a canon-only policy so that they don't show things like this, or the Ewok movies, or the original Clone Wars movies. And often, when a media company gets acquired, they list every single asset they have to boost their overall value, even if they never intend on releasing some of those. So I think, given that, we can probably say that there is a master of this somewhere in Lucasfilm's archives. It has not been destroyed, as has been consistently told over and over again. There is a pristine copy of it out there somewhere. We'll probably never see it, but they probably have it out there. So that's a little bit of news that has not been said anywhere on YouTube that I'm aware of. So getting into some of the mechanics of this, because it's worth noting some of them, there are 5 writers attached to this thing. Rod Warren, Bruce Valanche, of all people, Pat Proft, Leonard Rips, and a woman who was also one of the producers, Mitzi Welch. 5 writers. Okay, too many writers is bad. What I am quite certain happened on this one is they had some basic idea for a story. And they said, let's get some musical acts. And so they'd get a musical act. They'd take the script that somebody had written, and they'd say, here, pass it off to somebody else. Make sure you get the musical act in here somehow. Then they'd get another musical act signed, and they'd pass it off to another writer and say, put this musical act in here sometime. And then they pass it off to another writer and pass it off to another writer. And finally, the whole thing is just a giant fracking mess, which is what it turned into. And comedic writers. Yeah, those guys were Bruce Valanche in particular. His name on this is really astonishing to me. He's got some interviews on YouTube. His, if you know the holiday special, his recollections are a little bit off. But what do you expect? It's been 40 years. There were too many writers, and it just went from one hand to another hand to another hand, putting in musical numbers and trying to force things around it, and it turned into a nightmare because of it. Now the characters, oh man. Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker. He does a fine job here, but what you have to understand when you see him looking like this, between Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, Mark Hamill had a very bad car accident that did damage to his face. And I think what you're seeing here is he was still healing from that. So they slathered on a ton of makeup. He couldn't do much moving of his eyes, which is why his eyes tend to be open the whole time. If he wants to communicate that they're closing, he looks down. When he smiles, it's absolutely creepy. Because, again, he's got something going on, and there are probably scars and stuff that you can't see that's totally covered and slathered in makeup. And then they put that wig on him. And I'm sure that wig is covering other scars and stuff like that. The guy was still healing. Only reason he did this, the only reason any of them did it, was because they were contractually obligated. And to put him in this position, I was rather shocked. You know, here he is, he's still healing from this car accident, and they shove him in. And not only that, they have a smoke machine running in the background, and they put him in the smoke quite a lot. Again, to hide what's going on with his face. Larry says, Valanche wanted to write TV specials all the time. Yeah, oh yeah, he did. And a comedic writer, as you say. Just weird to find him on this, but no weirder than everything else goes on. And then we have Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia. Okay, Princess Leia. Carrie Fisher has herself said that she had a severe cocaine problem at that time. And as we know now, that problem plagued her entire life and ultimately was the cause of her death. You know, I tend to overlook that on most things because, to me, and to a lot of people in my generation, we consider Carrie Fisher our princess. And it's always amazing to me because John Williams wrote an entire musical score for Princess Leia that, for me, is now Carrie Fisher's official theme song. So she was out. She was really, really strung out, and it really shows. You know, she's barely getting her words out. And the interesting thing is, one of the reasons she did this is because she wanted a musical number, which she got at the end, and it doesn't make any damn sense in the context of anything. And again, she's strung out. So, you know, it's bad that she was strung out. When I was a kid and I first saw it, I knew something was weird and wrong with her. I attributed it at that time, because I didn't really know anything about cocaine or stuff like that at age 13. I attributed it to her kind of being drunk, maybe. But knowing the truth now, you know, it is a problem that plagued her entire life and ultimately resulted in her death. But she will always, to me and many people of my generation, still be my princess. And for those of you who are feminists out there and you're looking for a strong female character, ignoring this piece of crap, Princess Leia is a strong female character. This is somebody who was getting rescued by people who had no plan and just took over. This is what you should be doing as feminist role models. Not these flat, one-dimensional, women are always perfect that we're seeing in the Star Wars movies now. So, then we have Han Solo and Harrison Ford. Now, there are a lot of people who are suggesting that Harrison Ford didn't work very hard on this, but I disagree. I disagree. When we're seeing him, he seems like he is working at it. Even when he has to do things like hug the Wookiees and tell them that they're like his family, he is working. That stuff works. Even though he did not want to do this, he said it a million times in talk shows and interviews, didn't want to do it. He had to do it for the contractual obligations. But I still think he's working. Personally, and this is a very weird thing, Harrison Ford always looked a lot like my own father. It was weird. When they were young, they looked the same. As they aged, they tended to look the same. And now my father's passed away, and I look at Harrison Ford and I go, you know, this is what my father would look like if he lived to be this age. It is so weird. His whole life I've been watching this. It's not just me who thinks this too. Other people have mentioned that, yeah, there's definitely some kind of a resemblance. And it's so weird that they grew up and got older and still look exactly the same. I don't know why. It's one of the reasons that Harrison Ford does have a special heart in my special place in my heart. Although, you know, now he's getting into activism that bothers me a lot. But still, the fact that I can look at him, I could say, God, you know, this is what my dad might look like now. You know. Then we have Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca. Chewbacca just does his thing. He's working. Nothing wrong with what he's doing here. He doesn't have a hell of a lot to do, even though the fact that, you know, his family is center stage in this story, particularly the fan edit. But he does his thing and he's working. No problems there. Then there's Mala, his wife, played by Mickey Morton, a guy. And as an actor, this is particularly obvious when they're together. They're both heterosexual. Now, when you have a, you know, straight couple and they're together, they have a certain type of body language. I mean, I learned about this fairly early on. You know, when you're supposed to be getting into a romantic situation with somebody who's another actor, you really have to pretend that you really love them. And that includes your body language. You know, you sidle up to them. You have certain types of things you do when you hug them and things like that. You know, Mala does a good job when she's by herself. Mickey does a good job when she's by herself. But when they get together and they're looking at each other and kind of hugging, it is really the body language of two men hugging. It is not the body language of people who are, you know, a straight couple who are in love with each other. That does not work at all. And I don't necessarily blame anybody for that. You know, I think you would have had to have a director who said, hey, wait a minute, don't do it like that. You know, get a little closer. You know, when you hug her, it's going to be different. You know, do things like, and it's cliche, but I mean, you could have, what they did was two guys hugging. It really looks like two guys hugging. They put arms around each other this way, the exact same thing, and their heads are on, you know, right next to each other. Not the way that should have been done. If I were directing that, I would have said, no, here's what you do. Chewbacca, you put your arms around her. She can put her arms on your chest and kind of lean her head up against you. That is more like the body language that you would see between a straight couple who were in love. So that part of it does not work for me at all. But otherwise, Mickey does a good job. And then we get into the straight-out weird ones. Lumpy. Oh, man. When Lumpy smiles, it's just scary. Lumpy was played by Patty Maloney. Now, the interesting thing about all of these characters, including Itchy, that I'm going to get to in a second, is the beginning of this film, and anytime you're with the Wookiees and Saldan is not around, it's all just Wookiee noises with no subtitles. But with the fan edit in particular, I can still tell what's going on. You know, they'll growl at each other and stuff, but their body language, what they do on the set, you can see what's going on. You don't really have to guess. And that, again, is particularly evident in the fan edit. It's just really good that way. Larry says, Ford was a working carpenter before American Graffiti. Yeah, which is why I've never figured out why the guy wanted to kill off Han Solo all the time. Why would you do that? Why? Making tons of money on this character. Why? It makes no sense to me. You see that sometimes with actors who say, oh, I don't want to be associated with this. Kill off my character. And I'm like, why? Why? You're making so much money. Why? Then we have Itchy, played by Paul Gale. Oddly enough, Itchy probably gives the best performance, and that's partly because he has this huge underbite. And he gets to be a little more expressive with what he does. And he uses his eyes to his great effect. He uses his head as body language to great effect. I think he does a really good job as the Wookiee. Aside from the fact that he's only about 4 feet tall for a race that's supposed to be 7 feet, you would think the father of Chewbacca is going to be pretty damn tall. But again, in terms of what he does, and because he's around and he does, body language and stuff that makes sense, especially in the fan edit, you can follow what's going on, even though they're only ever speaking Wookiee. Then there's Art Carney as Saldan. Now, Art Carney, by this time, was a well-known and respected actor. He had got his fame in the 1950s when he did the Honeymooners. And he had played a lot of comedic characters. He'd also played a lot of straight characters. And so when he came into this, he was supposed to be playing a buffoon. But in the fan edit, Doug does an extraordinary job of completely changing his tone. He becomes someone who is, kind of clever. He's there trying to help the Wookiees, and when the Imperials show up, then he gets a little goofy in order to throw them off. Stuff like the Imperials are looking at his ID, and he's like, yeah, I've sort of gained some weight since then. By the way, do you want to buy one of these leather cases that I've got? I sell these for people's identification. I got 1 million of them. Do you want to buy them? He tries it several times. And in the context of this fan edit, it works. It works completely. It changes his whole tone, but it works completely, and I love it. Short for comedic effect. Yeah, that's why he was. That's the real reason. He was short for comedic effect. But again, Itchy works. He works. Even though in the fan edit he doesn't have anything to do except kind of wander around the house. He still works. It still works. You can tell from his body language what's happening. And then there's everybody else. Well, when you get into the fan edits, you get rid of B. Arthur, you get rid of Jefferson Starship, you get rid of Diane Carroll, you get rid of Cirque du Soleil, and everybody else boils down to stormtroopers. And the stormtroopers do their stormtrooper thing, and in the fan edit, they do it well, and it's well done. Fan edit here is great. Then there are producers. I don't always talk about producers, but in this case I'm going to, because there are 8 producers on this, 2 executive producers, Gary Smith and Dwight Hamian, 3 straight-up producers, line producers, Joe Layden, Jeff Starch, Ken Welch, and then a producer-writer, Mitzi Welch, and then 2 associate producers, Monroe E. Carroll and Rita Smith. Just as with too many writers, too many producers spoil the pot. In television, in movies, right, the producer's job is to get the money, and then they pass off what is the creative vision, usually, to the director and the writer. In TV, it's a little bit different. The producer still has to get all that money, still has to deal with everything, but the producer usually has some level of vision about what they want to do. You get that many producers in, you no longer have a vision of any kind. I don't know why there were that many. I suspect it was a question of, oh, we got another musical number, quick, we needed a producer to deal with that artist or something. But it just muddies everything up and turns it into crap. Now, there are 2 directors associated with this. The first one, David Akamba. I'll go through the IMDb's on some of these next because they're interesting. David Akamba's IMDb was 1981 to 2006 with 12 director credits, including 2 TV series in which he did 13 episodes. He did 2 producer credits and 1 music department credits. He did almost exclusively TV, and he did win an award, the Canadian Film Award in 1973 for Best Direction for Slipstream. Now, he is uncredited because he quit like 1 or 2 days into shooting. I do not know why for sure. The stories are different. Either he couldn't deal with what they were doing on the set or the stupid was just too much, but he quit during shooting. That's also always bad. When your director quits mid-shooting, even at the beginning, that's bad. You got to go out and find another director, and I have no way to judge what he directed because he left. I don't know what's his. Now, the credited director is Steve Binder, who has an IMDb from 1963 to present with 46 producer credits, with multiple TV series, multiple episodes, and a ton of varieties and musicals. He has 63 director credits, multiple TV series, multiple episodes, with a ton of variety and musical specials that tend to overlap with his producers. He won the Primetime Emmy in 1977 for Outstanding Special Comedy Variety or Music for The Barry Manilow Show. Again, we're into a period where there were a lot of variety shows and musical specials. He won the Cable Ace Award in 1984 for directing a comedy or music program for Diana Ross, Live from Central Park. Again, lots and lots of these things that they had, the varieties. Now, in terms of his direction, he'd done a ton of varieties. He had a ton of them under his belt by that time. For a variety show, he was probably the best director under the circumstances. He knew how to direct the variety numbers, which he did pretty well. Otherwise, it's kind of flat and predictable, but consistent with varieties of the era. The variety numbers that you see now remind you of music videos. But back then, there were no music videos. So these variety numbers were directed sort of like music videos, and he did a good job with those. I can't fault him. But he does also have a 6 degrees of Star Trek, because he produced and directed the TV movie Lucy in London. And, of course, Lucille Ball and her husband, Desi Arnaz, had started and owned Desilu Studios, where Star Trek, the original series, was originally produced before it was sold off to Paramount. Cinematographer, and we're going to see a lot of this, some repetition of this. Cinematographer was John B. Field, 1974 to 2018, with 105 miscellaneous crew credits, which included a ton of awards shows and varieties, and a ton of Academy Awards shows that he did. He also has 13 camera and electrical department credits, also with a ton of awards movies, and he has only one cinematographer credit, that's this. Guy won the Emmy 3 times. 1992, he won the Outstanding Individual Achievement in Technical Direction / Camera / Video for a miniseries or special for Paul Simon's Concert in the Park. 1996, he won the same award for Sinatra, 80 Years My Way. And then he won Outstanding Technical Direction Camera Work Video for a miniseries, movie, or TV, or a special for the 50th Annual Grammy Awards. Again, lots of award shows and stuff under his belt. Now, for his cinematography, it's fine for this kind of show. He was a guy who was directing and doing cinematography for lots and lots of musicals and specials and variety shows. So he knew how to get, you knew what you're supposed to look at. You can see what you were supposed to see. Music here is by Ian Fraser, who ran from 1961 to 2012 with 64 music department credits, 13 composer credits, 8 soundtrack credits on a ton of varieties and award shows. And he also won a ton of Emmys. He won the Emmy in 1977 for Outstanding Achievement in Music Direction for America Salutes Richard Rodgers, The Sound of His Music. 1978, he won the same award for the Century Collection Presents Ben Vereen and His Roots. Again, another special. Same award in 1980 for Baryshnikov on Broadway. 1981, same award for Linda in Wonderland. 1980 was the last one. 84 is the next one. Same deal for... In 1984, he won the same award for Screen Actors Guild 50th Anniversary Celebration. We're seeing a definite pattern here. In 1985, he won the same award for Christmas in Washington. 1988, same award for Julie Andrews, The Sound of Music. 1989, same award for Christmas in Washington again. 1990, same award for Julie Andrews in Concert. And then finally, 1991, an Outstanding Achievement in Music and Direction that's not credited to anything. Clearly, doing a lot of music for a lot of different specials and musicals. Larry says, wonder what these people would say today about working on this crap. The director has apparently said a fair amount of bad things. I don't know anybody who said anything good about it. I don't know of anybody. There's lots of people out there with conflicting stories, and I don't know what to think about those, but I certainly have never seen anybody with a quote who has anything good to say about this at all. Now, in terms of his music, oddly enough, by this time, because I'd been hearing him over and over and over, I could recognize his style. I didn't know who had done it, but when I heard the original music that's in here, I could recognize this man's style. And to his credit, he does get some different musical pieces and cues that are based on the John Williams Star Wars themes, and they're pretty seamless. Cannot fault him for that. I don't think he had anything to do with the musical numbers themselves. That was stuff that the people who were singing the musical numbers did. But the original music, the incidental music, I recognized his style, even though I didn't have the slightest idea who the composer was. But I'd heard him so often between then. Art direction is by Brian Bartholomew, who has 1962 to 86, 17 production designer credits, 15 art direction credits, and guess what? He did a lot of musicals, a lot of varieties, and celebrity TV specials. He also won Emmys. Oh, I love the length of some of these Emmy Awards. In 1973, he won Outstanding Achievement in Art Direction or Scenic Design for a musical or variety single program of the series or a special program for The Julie Andrews Hour. 1974, he won Best Art Direction or Scenic Design for a musical or variety special program of a series or a special program for Barbra Streisand and Other Musical Instruments. 1977, he won that Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Achievement in Coverage of Special Events Individuals for the 28th Annual Primetime Emmy Awards. His design. Now, there are conflicting things about the design elements in here. Some of it say that it should be attributed to other people because they did not originally do this set in a way that you would usually do with this kind of thing, which is a 3-camera set. You have an open set with 3 cameras, and you kind of switch back and forth. Apparently, this set was fairly buttoned up and intended to be shot with a single camera, which screwed up some of the direction and may have been part of why the original director left. So I don't quite know what's going on here. I can say that regardless of who did it, the Wookiee treehouse interior is pretty good. It's not his fault what happens in it. And he does successfully recreate some of the look and feel of the Star Wars cantina. Again, it's not his fault what happens there. Special effects artists, there are 4 listed. 3 listed, I'm sorry. Jen DeJoe, who did video animation, Elizabeth Savell, who did video animation, and John Sempitis, who was the Ultramatter engineer and operator. I assume when we're talking about the Ultramats, we're talking about when they married this picture into the things. The video animation, I suppose, would be things like the computer screens. They're very hackneyed and predictable. When you get into sound effects and stuff like that, it's just, these sort of TV computer sound effects that you're used to seeing, TV monitor stuff that you're used to seeing, with big words on it, it's just not very good. I don't know that it was necessarily their fault. This thing operated, as do everything, under the 3 limitations: time, talent, and money. And I think the money may have been an issue, in some cases the talent, and certainly the time. Costume design, on the other hand, was by a huge name in costuming, Bob Mackie, whose IMDb ran 1962 to 2007 with 61 costume designer credits, 32 wardrobe and wardrobe department credits, where he did multiple TV shows, specifically 269 episodes of the Carol Burnett Show. And he also did a fair number of other musicals and variety shows. Basically turning a sci-fi fantasy into a TV musical variety that didn't work. Yeah. Again, you wonder who greenlit this. Who thought that this was a good idea? Musicals were on their way out by then. They had really reached their peak a couple of years before, and nobody was interested. Why? Why would you do this? Now, Bob Mackie also won awards. He was a very well-known guy by this time. Won a bunch of them. Oh, man, did he win a bunch of them. Larry says Bob Mackie wouldn't turn down anything at that time. Yeah, that's true. But still, he was very good at what he did. And he won a ton of awards. Oh, my God. He won Emmys. I'm not even going to go through them all. I'll just tell you what he won them for so you can get an idea of what he was doing. He won one in 1967 for Alice Through the Looking Glass, 1970 for GIT on Broadway, 1978 for Mitzi, Zings into Spring, 1984 for Mama's Family, with spin-off of Carol Burnett's show that he'd been doing, 1991 for Carol and Company, which was a special with Carol Burnett, 1995 for Men, Movies, and Carol, again, a Carol Burnett thing. 2000 for Cher, live in concert from Las Vegas. And in 2003 for Cher, the Farewell Tour. So again, a guy who was doing a lot of stuff. Cheryl's personal costumer, yes, he was. And damn near the same for Carol Burnett. He did so many episodes of the Carol Burnett Show. 2001, he won the American Choreographers Institute Governor's Award, which is basically a lifetime achievement. 1999, he won the Costume Designer Guild Award, Career Achievement. And in 2005, he won the Legend Award from TV Land Awards for the Carol Burnett Show. All of those episodes he'd done. Again, this guy was a legend in variety costuming by that time. He was probably, when you look at it as a variety show, he was probably the best guy for the job. His costumes are probably the ones that are on B. Arthur, Diane Carroll, probably Jefferson Starship, certainly Harvey Korman, and basically everything that was cut from the edit. And he did either, and I'm not sure what happened, successfully recreated the original characters' costumes or got them on loan from Fox Lucasfilm. I don't know which. But the costuming here is fine. It's everything that you see with the musical numbers, even Diane Carroll with her weird costume, that was normal at the time. You would, in a variety show, they would often make weird costumes for some of the singers, especially attractive females like that. Now, the makeup on this is attributed to a team. I have no idea what to say about it. The Wookiees are fine. Most of the makeup on the aliens and stuff is weird. Harvey Korman and his 8-armed or 4-armed cooking show host. It's not like you didn't know that it was somebody else's arms behind him running the 2 below his regular ones. And in the middle of doing all this whip, stir, whip, stir, whip, 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 stir that goes on forever, his hair starts to fall out. Not that great. Out of the production into reception by all three, fans, critics, and regular viewers. This has a Rotten Tomato score, oddly enough, of 33%, but there's only 9 reviews on it, with an average of 3.5 out of 10. I think if a lot of people went up and really reviewed this thing, it would drop way below 33%. Let's see. Makeup for Tom Savini. Larry says, it's a mess. In general, this has become notable for its extremely negative reaction from both the public, Star Wars fans, and critics. Nathan Rabin of AV Club has something that I thought was really funny. He said, "I'm not convinced that the special wasn't ultimately written and directed by a sentient bag of cocaine." Yeah, As I say, if you watch this when you're really stoned, you might get something out of it. It's reported that George Lucas did not have any significant involvement in this film's production and was unhappy with the results. Yeah, well, he wants to take a sledgehammer to all of them. Patty Manning, however, who played Lumpy, said in 2008 that he was sent dailies for approval. I don't know how seriously to take that. You're talking about the woman who played the Lumpy. How does she know this? You're sitting on the set. How would you know for sure that the dailies are going out to Lucas at Lucas's ranch or something? I don't know that she'd know. Looking at it, I have to say, if I was George Lucas, I'd have hated the thing. I wouldn't have. If they sent me dailies, I would have been going, no. The only way that they could possibly justify sending dailies is if Lucas just didn't really care. He's sitting here watching his profits go up and up and up on Star Wars, and he just says, yeah, fine, whatever, do whatever you want to. But knowing how he's protected of these properties, it's hard to imagine that he really did see him. Larry says horror makeup artist Tom Savini. It's the makeup on everybody but the Wookiees and the original characters are just weird and stupid, and particularly Harvey Korman in drag as a four-armed post, and that stupid thing where he's got a hole in his head where he pours his drinks. Larry says, how did they get Lucas's approval? Like I say, I don't think they did. Lucas actually started out, I've seen them on the internet, you can find them with treatments of this that are better, that make more sense and stuff, that really involve Chewbacca and a couple of other rebels. But they quickly just took that and turned it into crap. And at that point, I don't think Lucas was involved at all. If he was, I think he would have put the kibosh on this because it's terrible. Now, David Hofstede, who is author of the book, What Were They Thinking? The 100 Dumbest Events in Television History, ranks the Hollywood special as number 1, calling it the worst 2 hours of television ever. And I totally agree. And more recently, Sam Shepard-Smith, who's a anchor for Fox News Channel, called it, quote, 70s train wreck combined with the worst of Star Wars with the utter worst of variety television. And I cannot disagree. I cannot disagree at all. So, end the review here. We can ask ourselves, is it any good? Well, the fan edit, yes. I would definitely recommend that fan edit. I think it's very good. It is not great. It'll never be great. But it throws out everything that's complete crap and sticks to a plot that actually flows. I would watch that fan edit, not the original. There are a bunch of different ones out there. Some are better than others. But I really like this one as the best. And again, you should not watch the original unless you want to be a Fandi master, in which case you have to watch it. Otherwise, you need to be a purist, high as Carrie Fisher when she made it, or just a psychopath, so hopefully it makes sense. You will enjoy this fan edit a lot more. Watch the fan edit. It does take what is this unmitigated piece of garbage, makes it into a coherent story. Well, that will never be great, but it's coherent, it makes sense, and as a 13-year-old in 1978, while I'm not sure, I don't think I would have thought it was great, I probably would have given it some kind of pass on. I would have said, well, ain't the greatest thing they ever did, but, it had the cartoon. That would probably be my thing. Larry there says, train wreck of TV people wanting to cash in on the Star Wars phenomenon. Yeah, especially all the guest stars. Those people, the people who were in that, Jefferson Starship, Diane Carroll, Harvey Korman, B. Arthur, they were all names at that time. They were successful in other things that they were doing. And as you say, I think they just really said, Star Wars? You want me to do a Star Wars thing? Abso-fraggin-lutely. That thing's making crap tons of money. It's the most, it's biggest grossing at the time movie ever. Yeah, I want in on some of that. So, yeah, I can certainly see that. I can absolutely see that. Yeah. Okay. got something totally unrelated to talk about. This is where I go off onto my commentary. Something happened this week. I have discussed education on this show before. However, Bill Maher has provided me with an opportunity to discuss the whole thing in one fell swoop, and so I'm going to make a clip out of it. Bill Maher has written an article called Adulting, for which I have a link to in below. In it, he rather dismissed Stan Lee mere days after Stan Lee's death in incredibly poor taste and appropriately invoking the ire of the entire fanish world worldwide. And he accused people of being less than adult for reading comic books. Now, anybody in fandom knows Maher's argument is obviously specious. The place of science, I will say for me personally, in comics led me to adult science fiction at about age 7, and I read and I read and I still read the giants in both fields. To some extent, this inspired me to go on to a degree in computer science at a time, I always like to say, when the science part of it mattered. And then my generation and I built the internet. You're welcome. All of that started for me in comics. And as I said in my own video, thank you, Stan Lee, beyond that, Stan Lee brought joy to the world on a global scale for which he will be remembered probably for centuries. All that Bill Maher has ever brought to the world is division and hatred, and he will not be remembered at all. Larry said, thanks for painting the picture of the TV culture Star Wars phenomenon of the time. Yeah, I appreciate that. I do try to, get it in context. Anyway, in his article, Maher is literally saying that young people are stupid, and Trump was elected, of course he has to push that in there, because they refuse to grow up and stop reading comic books. He's dead wrong. The people aren't stupid, nor are they man-children. They're just uneducated. As I've said before on the show, I worked as an instructor at a junior college, the place that shall not be named, for 3 years. And when I was there, I smacked in the face with a very obvious problem, which is that our schools are churning out illiterate ignorami. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I mean that we now have an entire generation, and well into our second, that cannot read nor write nor perform the most basic math. While I was there, the stories that I like to talk about, and I've talked about them before, my students had difficulty distinguishing between the words Linux and Linksys. Linux is spelled Linux. Linksys is spelled Linksys. That was not unusual. And there were lots of other words they couldn't distinguish. In one particularly memorable moment, I was tutoring a student. Now, when you're an instructor, one of the things you really live for is when the light bulb goes on over the head. You really like that as an instructor because it makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you've done your job. When a student is going, I don't get this, I don't get it. Oh, now I get it. And as an instructor, you go, good, good. I did my job right. The kid knows it. Awesome. In this case, when I was tutoring the student, the light bulb went on in a place that I really hated it. And that was when the student realized that books have page numbers, which told me instantly that in 12 years of compulsory education, and certainly not recreationally, this student had never once cracked a book, and yet this student had been passed out of high school. Other things that go on in there, my most favorite anecdote is when it was just amazing, a student in what amounted to a remedial math class, because they don't teach any math in K through 12, got into a gigantic argument with his PhD level math instructor that division by zero was possible. He got into a giant argument with it, ended up storming out of the room, went straight to administration, and tried to file a grievance against the instructor on the basis that the instructor was Jewish. And utterly ridiculous. Larry says, Fantastic Four comics got me into the Marvel Universe in the 1960s. Yeah. Comics have a massive influence on people, far beyond what Bill Maher thinks. But those are some of my anecdotes, and I've got lots of others. They're just the ones that I like to show because of not the biggest even, just memorable. What we have now is an educational system that teaches nothing, but instead indoctrinates students to believe in socialist and communist philosophies that are absolutely dangerous and will lead to death. They churn out illiterate ignoramai with no skills to survive in life. Now, whose fault is it? Well, it's the baby boomers and my generation. And to some extent, Bill Maher is more to blame than me personally. Regardless of whatever Bill Maher says, Bill Maher is a leftist who approves of this kind of indoctrination. Do not listen to him when he says he's a libertarian, because he's clearly not. I'm a libertarian. I know one when I see one. He's a leftist who believes in some level of government involvement in some key aspects of individual lives. He believes in government that created this educational system that does not educate our young. Larry says, as you said, schools today are prisons teaching nothing. Yes. In fact, there is now no way to salvage our schools, because there are not even particularly literate teachers anymore. What they do not know would fill the Grand Canyon. They are near illiterate and certainly outright ignoramai themselves, and so therefore cannot teach anything to anyone. What should be done is that all teachers from K through 12 and preferably through the PhD level professors should be summarily fired right now. And individuals within industries such as mine should be hired on an adjunct basis. We should be paid a small amount to leave our jobs for a couple of hours a day and teach K through 12 classes and possibly college. And to give you an example, here's what I personally can teach. I can teach reading through the college level. I can teach English composition to the 3rd grade level. I stop there because I cannot diagram sentences. I can teach writing through the college level. I can teach American literature on the K through 12 level. I can do math through calculus, which, by the way, should be available to advanced students in high schools. I can teach any IT subject, hardware through the college level, and programming in various languages through the introductory level, and these should also be available in students. I can teach American history through the college level, world history through the middle school level, civics through the college level, French through the college level. I can teach theater, stagecraft, acting, because I was once an actor, directing, and I can produce student productions through the K through 12 level. And believe it or not, I can also teach weightlifting with an emphasis on bodybuilding through the entire college level. And I am dead certain that employers would love to allow their educated employees to leave their jobs for a couple of hours a day because they need an educated workforce. Today, the only thing that a college graduate can reliably do is flip burgers, and they paid through the nose to get it. And there is another problem that is easily solved. The cost of education can be solved very easily, because the reason tuition is so expensive is because the federal government guarantees it. That means that regardless of whether a student is capable of passing a course or has the money for an education, the federal government will pay the school. Colleges and universities will get the money regardless, and consequently they admit anyone at any price they choose to charge. If the responsibility for student loans was put back on the student, as it was when I got my degrees, colleges and universities will admit only those who can pass, and then they will lower tuition to fit what a student can reasonably pay. Larry says, we started basic programming on a teletype terminal back in 1971. Yeah. I don't think they do anything. I mean, I don't know what they do with computers, but it can't be anything like teaching programming languages, not really. You have to be able to read in the first place. So Bill Maher, in his stupid article, he doesn't see any of this, and he is in favor of continuing what we always have, indoctrination rather than education. This is why students are uneducated, but not stupid. We will continue to get nothing but what we call NPCs or social justice warriors as long as the current system is allowed to stand. Mar is completely misguided and stupid because he doesn't understand the issue, nor the problem, nor its solution. QED. Okay. That would be my little ranting for the day. And so, I'm probably going to go into my closing at this point. I'm going to make about 2 hours, which is kind of cool. I was afraid I would go 3 with this piece of junk. Again, watch the one that is the fan edit. It is so much better. It makes sense. And it gets rid of everything that's total crap. So watch Doug Baughman's fan edit. Check out his channel. Subscribe. Looks like good content he's got out there. So take a look at it. So, I guess I would talk about what's coming up next. Also mentioned down here, when you look at the archives, I'm putting the archives in 2 places right now. One is here on YouTube. The other is on BitChute, which, oddly enough, I'm getting more views on BitChute than I am here. Quite a lot more. I'm not sure why, but we do. So I might do a little bit of ad copy for the rest of this week, actually beginning of next week. Can't do that when you have cotton mouth. So, Sunday on Tales from SYL Ranch. Arriving in the 17th century Lancashire, the TARDIS team become embroiled in a witch trial. Now, the arrival of King James I intensifies the hunt for witches. Could something more dangerous be at play? That's next Sunday on the Fandi Masters review of Doctor Who Season 11, Episode 8, The Witchfinders. Then, Monday on Tales from SYL Ranch. Professor Quatermass is back, trying to perfect a dangerously unstable, nuclear-powered rocket engine. After a disastrous firing in Australia, his soon-to-be son-in-law, Captain John Dillon, draws the professor's attention to a strange hollow meteor. Now, the contents of the meteor threaten the world itself. That's next Monday on the Fandi Masters Retro Review of Quatermass 2. And of course, my schedule has not changed at any particular time. I am here live Sundays and Mondays in North America at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Pacific, and if you're working off of UTC, that's 2 a.m. Tuesday morning. So, upcoming reviews. There is a schedule on my website, www.wrstone.com. And on Sundays, I will be continuing Doctor Who for the next 3 weeks, because that's all we've got left. After Quatermass 2, on December 2nd, I do The Fly, starring Vincent Price, which hits its 60th. December 24th, I am not sure what I'm going to do about the week of September. I have this idea, and I'm going to have to run it past my family, and I don't know that they will give the thumbs up on it. But the Christmas tree that we're going to be having is straight off this direction for me. It won't be on screen, but I have this notion about what if I just turned on the camera? What if I just announced the show, turn on the cam, and let you guys spend Christmas with the Stones? Christmas Eve with the Stones. I don't know if that'll fly. My family may not want to do that. If I don't, somewhere in that week, it'll be after the 25th, I will work in some kind of review. I'm not sure what yet, but I'll work something in that week a little later. Then, December 31st, from 8 p.m. to Central Time to midnight in all American time zones, celebrate the new year with a Fandi Master while we review the Orville Season 2, Episode 1, Primal Urges, and definitely remember, bring your shampipple. Then January 7th, I have Son of Frankenstein hitting its 70th, And January 14th, we will celebrate the Fandi Master's birthday with the 100th anniversary review of Mistress of the World. There's also one other one on January 1st, because Doctor Who does not have a Christmas episode. It has a New Year's episode. Despite the fact that I will be up until 2 a.m. my time on the day before for doing New Year's Eve, I will get up and I will do a review of that at my usual time there. Larry says, Andy Williams, Christmas with the Stone family. No singing. We don't do much of that. But opening presents and stuff, I got a little niece who will probably be fun in terms of watching her do that. Again, I don't know that we'll be able to do this. My family may put the kibosh on it. But I'm going to put it past them and see what they say. If not, I'll find something else to put in that week, later in the week. So, at this point in time, I probably would ask the usual thing that I ask.
Say, pardon me, but could you help out a fellow American who's down on his luck? Hit the road!
So if you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, tell all of your friends, family, neighbor, pets, and livestock to do the same. You can contribute to my PayPal tip jar, which I have a link below, my Patreon. You can visit my website, which is www.wrstone.com, and see all kinds of things, including an upcoming schedule where I have things scheduled out, some of them in the next year that's not complete by any means. And you can take a look there at my Amazon wish list, which, as always, has a laptop that if you buy it for me, all of my technical problems disappear. And I can probably come at you at 24 frames per second, or at least 24, maybe 30, as opposed to the 10 that I have to do now. And again, you can see this all at my website, www.wrstone.com. As always, I have to thank the people who have contributed and are contributing. Some of what I have is photographic equipment that makes things a little better here in the studio. And, it sounds always, it's getting to be where it sounds like I'm just doing this by rote, but I'm really not. This is one of those deals that I get a giant kick out of the fact that someone would throw me money based on the showmanship that I'm doing as well as my own opinions. There is a little bit of showmanship involved here. I'm not fake. Recently, Emma Black already put up a Ask Her Questions video. It was just yesterday, I think. And she was asked how many YouTubers are fake. And she said she's now met most of them in the UK. They're nice people, but they're all fake. What you're seeing here is not fake. I'm not playing a part. I am doing something with my costume for an image sort of thing. But what I do here otherwise is real. There's just a little showmanship involved. So, in the immortal words of Elvis Presley, oh, thank you very much. So, I guess that would be all the time that we have today, boys and girls. So, tune in on Sunday when I do my mini review of Doctor Who Season 11, Episode 8. The Witchfinders, and then on Monday for my review of Quatermass 2. Until then, this is Tales from SYL Ranch, the vlogcast that reminds you to always know where your towel is, especially if you plan to watch the entire Star Wars Holiday Special. And I'm your host, Bill Stone.
Ultimate power in this world has always been one simple thing: the control and manipulation of minds.